Hi and welcome to this webinar. Rudander is my name and I'm working for Crayon. Have you also sometimes wanted to investigate something that is difficult to measure? It may be customer satisfaction, stress, attitudes, etc. Today I will show you a real project that I was involved in many years ago, where we would measure the traffic behavior and what kind of drivers who were interested in speed warning equipment in cars. But I will also explain the method I use for this, factor analysis and some part of cluster analysis. I have divided this webinar into two parts. So we start with part 1. And the agenda, I start talking about complex information and also to understand correlation, index and groups. And after that, I get into the area of today's webinar, explain traffic behavior using statistics, something that is difficult to measure. But in this project, there were traffic researchers who had found 30 questions on the web that they were allowed to use. And I will show you how to group all of these questions by using factor analysis, which is the first trick to measure the unmeasurable. The questions that forms these different groups, I will continue to create an index of, and I will briefly review different types of index. Finally, I will go through cluster analysis to see which individuals are similar to each other and end up in the same cluster. We can call it segmentations. And these clusters I will then investigate against the main question in the questionnaire, and that is if they are interested in the speed warning equipment in cars or not. So what is an unmeasurable variable? That's something that is hard to measure, like my example with traffic behavior. So one example could be, how satisfied are you with a hotel? In a scale from 1 to 5, 5 is very satisfied. And if we have a look at this first customer, this customer answered 1, not satisfied. Could I trust that answer? Probably not. Information could be hidden here. Pretend that this respondent was very dissatisfied with the reception. Then this could be the reason why he answered 1 on the question about the hotel satisfaction. It would rather be better to ask more than just general question, like this first one. And then it could be good to ask about the room and the restaurant and finally the environment. These all questions together will give us another picture about the satisfaction from the hotel customer, probably rather satisfied overall. So I would like to sum these questions together in an index. But before that, I must understand the relationship between the questions. In statistical terms, we call it correlation. And that's the method which is behind factor analysis. So let's first explain correlations, index and groupings. If we have two attitude questions, the reception and the restaurant, we here ask how much they agree on two attitudes, where 1 is disagree and 5 is agree. And we look how the first 5 customers answered these two questions. The first person was satisfied with both the reception and the restaurant and answered 5 and 5 on both questions. Also the second one was satisfied with both, but the third customer was not satisfied. This person answered 1 on the reception and only 1 on the restaurant. The fourth person was also dissatisfied, and the last person finally was satisfied with 5 and 4. You can see the two questions follow each other in the answers. So when a person answers a high value on the first question, they also answer a high value on the second question. We can say that these two questions or these two variables are correlated positively high. And the correlation coefficients is a number between -1 and +1. And if they have 0, you don't have any correlation. 1 and -1 is the highest correlation you can have. But if we ask one of the questions in a different way, like asking how much they agree on that the restaurant is bad instead, then we have exactly the same strong relation between the two questions, but this time the correlation is negative, very close to -1. So if I draw a picture of the correlation between my hotel attitude variables, I've got information that these 3 variables are highly correlated positively. Then a common method is to calculate these three variables together and call it index, satisfaction index. How this calculation should be done is up to you or the tradition in the area you are working. Some people choose a mean value between the three variables, some people just sum them, and some people also have some weights included, and finally some people choose factor scores from factor analysis, and then you have weights automatically included. That's something that I will show later. Just think about something that is really important to know, and that's when you use sum calculations. Look at the three answers from the first respondent. You have 15, 5 plus 5 plus 5. Very, very satisfied. But then have a look on this. But if there is a missing value, this will happen. The sum will be too low to give you a fair picture of how satisfied the customer is. It seems that this customer isn't so satisfied because of the missing value, because we have just 9 as the sum. So if you have missing value and wants to use own calculation, I recommend you to use the mean value instead. So here the mean value for the customer number 1 will be 5, and then we have the third person that is not so satisfied, so we have just 1.3. We can see the person with the missing value. It will be 4.5 this time, so rather satisfied. Then the last one is something between, both negative and positive answers. Then we have an index of 3.3. But before we create these types of index from several variables or questions from the questionnaire, we must use some variables that is correlated to each other, and they should be positively correlated. And to save time and effort, we will use factor analysis to help us finding out this. Factor analysis will find the groupings of the variables that is correlated to each other, and every group can then create an index. So if we get 4 groups, we can create 4 index. So back to my hotel example, I have 7 variables, and as I showed you before, the red variables were correlated to each other, so they create one group. Then we have the blue variables, and we can see that spa is correlated to the shopping, and shopping is correlated to the park, and park is correlated to spa. So here we have one group, but we also have one connection to the red group of variables, because there is a small correlation between spa and restaurant. In factor analysis, these groups will be called factors or components. And that's a group of correlated variables. Here you can see that the red and blue group is somewhat overlapping because of one correlation between 2 variables from each group. Next step is to find a name for the different groups based on the logical connection between the variables. So the variables in the red group seems to have something to do with the hotel physical facilities, and the other group is more which activities you can do at the hotel. And there's one question about the environment that is not correlated to anyone else. See the green circle. So it's close to correlation 0 with other variables. But I can keep that variable as it is. So next step is to find a logical name for the red group and for the blue group. So the common characteristics for the variables in the red group is the localization. And in the blue group, it has to do with activities like sport, golf, shopping. So let's call this group activity. But always when you look on your groups, you will find overlapping like these 2 groups. That is because of 2 variables that is correlated to each other. In factor analysis, we should call these 2 variables noisy. And what we want to do is to get rid of them. Because if we take them away, then we have more cleaner groups or cleaner factors, and they will not overlap each other anymore. The 2 groups or factors are not correlated to each other, and that's one of the ideas with factor analysis, to find uncorrelated clean groups. Still, the variable within the green circle will be alone, and later on when I do other statistical analysis, I will keep this variable environment as it is. But the other two groups are to create index for. And thanks to the clean groups, the index will be cleaner and more typically for its name. So why is factor analysis a method worth to use more than finding these groups? First, you get a better understanding of your questionnaire, especially if you have a lot of questions. You will see how the questions are related to each other. Then, this method is for many people a way to reduce data, or then I mean the variables or questions. If your goal is to do a shorter questionnaire, then if 5 questions belong to the same factor, because they are highly correlated to each other, why should you use all 5 questions next time you do a questionnaire? Just choose 1 or 2 to get a better quality in the responses. But if you rather want to measure them unmeasurable, then you should keep the variables, or at least the 3 most important variables per group, so you can catch the complex information, like satisfaction.
And one way is to create index from questions in a group.
Then we can catch them unmeasurable. Then, this is also a preparation method before you do other analysis like regression, because in regression analysis, you should avoid correlated x variables, and as every group of variables in the factor analysis are not correlated, then you can choose 1 variable per group as x variables in your multiple regression.
And you can also use the index variables.
Also in cluster analysis, it's easier to understand if you use a few uncorrelated variables. In my demo of the factor analysis that you will see in part 2, I will show you a real example I was involved in many years ago, and the goal was the EU project to find out which type of drivers are interested of speed warning equipment in the car. So we wanted to find out who are the speed drivers. That's something that could be hard to measure. We were also interested to find the weak drivers, or the drivers that are afraid in the traffic. But this is also something that is hard to measure. I will show you an example of a question that is not so good. Are you an unexperienced driver? People should probably answer no on that question, and we should get worthless data that should give us misleading results.
Instead, 30 questions will catch this information.
And the 30 questions is a lot of statements with answers from 1 to 5, where 5 is agree and 1 is disagree. Here is just an example of some of the 30 questions. The questions we used have been used in other studies, so they have been tested and should be of good quality already. Here's an example from the questionnaire that shows how a person has answered some of the questions. Have a look on the first and the fourth question. They are similar to each other, but asked in different way. The answer from the respondent is disagree on the first question about annoying driving behind a driver who is keeping the speed limit. And here also disagree on the question about it happy drive 30 km per hour above the speed limit. And I suppose a person who likes to drive fast instead agrees on both these 2 questions. If so, then the 2 questions are correlated to each other, and we will see that in the factor analysis later on. Then these 2 questions will be placed in the same group. In next part, I will show you how to do a factor analysis and also understand the results, and then cluster analysis and index.